for Raising the Bar, Greater RVA's premier Law Talk radio show. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
Good morning. This is Colleen Quinn of the law firm of Locke and Quinn, and welcome to Raising the Bar, Greater RVA's Law Talk radio show. Today we're going to talk about understanding the myths of adopting a child, which there's a lot of mystery and a lot of myth and a lot of misconceptions around adoption in America as well as international adoption. So it's going to be a great topic today. And remember, you can always call into the show at 804-454-1366 with your questions. Remember that Raising the Bar Law Talk radio show also is recorded on the Locke and Quinn Facebook live page. So if you miss any of the shows, you can always go watch them there. And they also are being uploaded to the Raising the Bar website. Remember that the Raising the Bar Law Talk radio show brings an exciting and varied array of legal topics to listeners throughout Central Virginia and especially in the greater Richmond area. At least once per week on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. you can join us for the 1 hour show, and we will share various legal tips, not just from us as attorneys, but also with the experts that we bring to the show. Other shows have featured issues such as employment law, workers' compensation, access to legal services, and a plethora of other topics. Also remember that Locke and Quinn is a personal injury and family law firm located conveniently at Willow Lawn, and we have a lot of dining options, so you can come get your beefy burrito, as I always say, or your Chick-fil-A sandwich and your legal services all in one-stop shopping. So joining me today is my associate, Kati Dean. Good morning, Kati.
Good morning, Colleen.
And Katie's going to be interviewing me, although Kati also practices adoption law with regard to the issues of adopting a child.
All right. And just so that our listeners know that they're listening to someone highly qualified on this topic today, let me first give you a little bit more background on Colleen. She is a national authority on adoption law, having done thousands of adoptions over the past 30 years and presented and published hundreds of times on the subject. She's the immediate past president of the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys, which is the only credentialed academy for adoption attorneys with about 500 fellows. And she also currently sits on the board of trustees of that organization. She's the owner of the Adoption and Surrogacy Law Center, and she's also the co-author of the Adoption Procedures and Forms book published by Virginia CLE, which is used by Virginia lawyers who are practicing in the area of adoption.
So hopefully I know my stuff, right?
Yes. As you can see, the information on today's program really is coming from an adoption expert. So, Colleen, let's turn to today's topic.
Great.
I think the first thing a lot of people want to know is what types of children are available for adoption in the United States.
And that's a great question, because a lot of folks come into our office and they think that there are going to be young, healthy infants readily available for adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that the children that are available for adoption in the United States are predominantly the ones that are in the foster care system.
Mm-hmm.
And we typically don't see a child freed up for adoption until a minimum age of 6. And more often, the children that are in the foster care system tend to be more along the lines of ages about 8 to
Mm-hmm.
17. So it is a matter of there not being a large supply. I mean, it just comes back to fundamental economics. There's not a large supply of newborn healthy infants, or even newborn drug exposed or special needs infants in the United States. And we're actually seeing those numbers continue to go down. I
Mm-hmm.
saw, in fact, statistically the other day, something that showed that young adults and teens also basically the statistics for them having sex had dropped as well. And of course, you know, if you're gonna have babies available for adoption,
right.
Sex has to happen in there somewhere.
So what about healthy newborn infants? I mean, what is the availability of them in the United States for adoption?
There is a much larger demand than there
Mm-hmm.
is a supply. So typically I will tell families, you know, that to expect to wait about a year. Now, if you're really good, and I call it opening as many doors of opportunity as possible in your search process, which might mean signing up with more than one what we call all-inclusive adoption agency that helps to find the child, along with doing a lot of things in terms of networking, posting profiles on various websites that allow you to post their profiles. If you do a lot of different things aggressively, then you might be able to get that adoption done within 6 months. But there's actually a lot of effort that has to go into identifying or finding that situation for a healthy newborn. And then even the children that are opiate exposed, fetal alcohol syndrome exposed, or have other special needs that are newborn children. Likewise, there are not, like I'll have clients come in and they'll say, well, we just feel compelled, either through church or whatever's compelling them, or they had an adoption in their family. We feel compelled to adopt a child in need, and I'm like, well, then you're pretty much looking at a child that's in the foster care system that's an older child, because those are really the children that are in need.
Right.
There isn't this large amount of young babies out there available to adopt.
Right. So what about adoptions from other countries? Are there children available in other countries?
There are, but again, statistically, the number of international adoptions has been dropping dramatically for a whole variety of reasons. One, we've seen countries open and close their doors to adoptions. We also have seen countries taking longer to free their children up for adoption. I was actually reading the other day, we've got a lot of countries that are doing a better job of moving children out of orphanages and into family-style homes in a number of countries. And so many foreign countries have tried to do a better job of taking care of their own rather than sending children outside of the country, better jobs of locating relatives that might take the children in. So you typically don't see a child available for adoption from a foreign country until they're about a year old or older that have been freed up for adoption. Now, there are cases where you might be able to get a newborn, but they statistically are a lesser number of cases. And so the other thing about adopting internationally is that most of these adoptions have to go through the Hague Treaty. And so you have to use somebody that has been accredited under the Hague. And the accrediting companies have gotten a little bit more stringent in their accreditation. And so the number of folks out there that are accredited to do this has dropped. So just a variety of factors have made it harder to get a child from another country. The countries such as Haiti and Ethiopia, et cetera, tend to still be sending a lot of their children to the U.S. And of course, there are missionaries, folks that will go and will come in on what we call a special juvenile immigrant status, where the child has special needs. Like you've seen children that we've had in our office who have had severe burns, or they're HIV infected, or they've got needs where they need really, really good medical care.
Right.
And so we'll have folks bring those type of children in. The other downside about international adoptions is a lot of times the adoptive parents won't get as much information about the genetics or the prenatal care or the background of the child. So there are definitely some different issues with adopting internationally that are not quite as much of an issue when we see adoptions happen domestically.
So how do children get adopted? What are the different ways that happens?
And that is a great question, because if you go onto any website, you just go to the internet and you Google adoption, you get all sorts of different entities that come up, most of them with an A at the beginning, like, Angel Adoptions and Adoptions R Us and, those sorts of things. And it's hard to figure out what do all these entities mean. But the adoption world basically boils down into the world of doing an agency adoption, and I call that the all-inclusive resort. This is where you sign up with an agency, and they are going to locate the right placement situation, get all the information on the placing mom and dad, figure out if there's more than one possible birth father, basically handle the legalities, take the entrustment or relinquishment from the birth parents. They are going to do everything as part of that price tag in terms of doing that adoption. That's the all-inclusive agency.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the agency side, we have the nonprofit agencies, but we also have public agencies, our departments of social services. So foster care adoptions actually fall into that agency adoption world. It's just that the foster care adoptions are going to come with subsidies, and they're going to be the least cost adoptions. Mm-hmm. And then most of our foreign adoptions also fall into the agency world because they are being done either through nonprofit agencies or through foreign governments. Mm-hmm. So I like to divide the adoption world into two different worlds because it's the easiest way of kind of being able to navigate all those things on the internet. So we have the agency side, which can include the all-inclusive nonprofit agency as well as your public agencies. And then on the other side, we have private adoption, or in Virginia, we call it parental placement, and in other states, we call it independent or direct. Mm-hmm. And that is where the placing parent locates the adoptive parents directly, not necessarily through an agency. It could be through an attorney, it could be through an agency, but basically they are doing a direct placement with the adoptive parents. And we're seeing those types of adoptions increasingly go up where, little Janie is pregnant and the family knows, and now that adoptions are no longer quite as taboo, or having an unexpected pregnancy is not quite as taboo. Little Janie's pregnant, the family knows, and Aunt Rosa knows somebody from work that has been wanting to adopt that's unable to have children. And so we're seeing more and more of those types of good old-fashioned networking, mm-hmm. Adoptions going up. And so that's kind of how adoptions are happening.
Okay. So with all these different types of adoptions, what are the costs that people are looking at to do an adoption?
Yes. So the people sometimes get sticker shock when they come in the office and I tell them, this is how much your adoption is going to cost. They're like, really? Yeah. So your adoptions of children out of foster care are going to be the least expensive because they come with subsidies. In Virginia, there's a $2,000 subsidy allowed for the attorney fees and costs, in addition to the subsidies that typically come with the child, and the child often also is on Medicaid. Mm-hmm. And so, and those children, you typically don't have to come out of pocket, especially if you've been certified as a foster parent, or you've been certified as a adoptive parent willing to take a child out of foster care. Then usually the cost of the home study is also covered. So those are kind of your least cost, no cost adoptions, your children out of foster care. Then we switch over to the world of the parental or private placement. If somebody locates a child on their own within Virginia, they actually can do that adoption under $15,000. And if they locate the child on their own outside of Virginia, then they're still looking at maybe doing it for under about $20,000, assuming the placing parent doesn't need a lot of assistance with mm-hmm. living expenses. And that really, the parental placements, private placements, are your lower cost adoptions. Then when we go to those all-inclusive agencies, those domestic agencies that pretty much find the child for you, do it all, mm-hmm. We're actually now seeing the numbers in the $25,000 to $50,000 range for a domestic agency placement. Then our foreign adoptions through agencies, usually an agency in the U.S. is working with an agency in another country, or the government of the other country. We are seeing those adoptions in the $40,000 to $50,000 range, with some exceptions for some adoptions out of Haiti, Ethiopia, some mm-hmm. of the more third world countries where you might see the price tag drop a little bit. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of misconception about what adoption cost, and some folks pay a pretty hefty price tag in order to adopt a child.
Mm-hmm. So what are the basic requirements in order to be approved to adopt a child?
Well, the big thing is having a home study done. And I have this great cartoon where there's a couple meeting with their social worker, and she's handing them a goldfish bowl, and she says, if you bring the goldfish back alive in 6 months, you'll pass the home study. Clients get really nervous about the home study, and I tell them it's not the white glove test.
Right.
But if you do have the boa constrictor or the pit bulls, you probably want to send those off to some other neighbors, and right. You need to lock up all the guns. And the biggest thing on the home study is one, you cannot have a chronic illness So I have had folks that are HIV positive, that are cancer survivors, et cetera, pass the home study. But if you have a severe illness where you might die next year, that's probably not going to be somebody that gets home study certified.
Mm-hmm.
And then in addition, the key thing is not having a criminal record or a CPS record that's going to bar you from adopting. So typically, if you have, there's something called barrier crimes. So there's a whole list of barrier crimes, and that includes a variety of horrible crimes that will bar someone from adopting. But I did have clients come in one time, and I started asking them about their criminal history to make sure they passed the home study. And typically, if it's a felony, within the last 10 years, that might fall within the barrier crimes. And then certain misdemeanors do as well. Well, this the gentleman, the adoptive father, and this was a parental placement, so the birth mother had already selected them, was content with this family, wanted to place with this family, and but the adoptive father had a misdemeanor for attempted assault with a missile. And I said, well, what is that? And he said, well, I had this road rage incident where somebody cut me off. And you know how you keep your change in the little compartment sometimes for tolls and whatnot? Well, he grabbed his handful of change and threw it out the window. And there happened to be a police officer that saw it. And so he was convicted of a misdemeanor of attempted assault with a missile. And I said, did you have an attorney? He said, no, because I think he could have pled that thing down.
Yeah.
But at any rate, it was a 9.5-year-old misdemeanor. So we actually had to just do a custody arrangement until the next 6 months cleared, and he was able to then pass the home study so that they could go ahead and adopt. So that is a big thing. You can't have any crime that's going to bar you from adopting. Yeah. And then also, of course, if you have any founded Child Protective Service charge, that's going to bar anybody from adopting as well. But generally, as long as you have the financial wherewithal to care for a child and you're morally and physically suitable, then the home study is going to be something that can easily be passed. And that is one of the fundamental things needed in order to do an adoption.
Right. So don't throw your change out the window.
Right.
What about age limits? Are there any age limits on being able to adopt?
Certain countries have age limits. And in fact, it's kind of weird. Some of these countries have these age limits where the combined age of the two parents that are going to adopt can't be more than like age 100 or more than 75. So it's kind of a weird way of doing it, because you could have, a 50-year-old and a 25-year-old, and you would think that would be maybe more problematic than their combined age, right? And some agencies in the United States have certain age restrictions, but there are no age restrictions at all in the world of parental or private placement. So I've had families in their 60s, 50s adopt because that was the right family that the placing mom decided upon and that she selected. And of course, all of our grandparent placements, our relative placements, there clearly are no age restrictions on those. And with the opioid crisis, we're seeing more and more relative and grandparent placements go up because of folks that are addicted that are not able to care for their kids. So grandma and grandpa step in. Yeah.
Can a child be adopted by more than two parents in Virginia?
We are working on that. In other states, especially states like California and states that are a little more progressive, they actually have statutes and case law that allow folks to do a 3-parent adoption and a 4-parent adoption, and which is great because in some cases there actually are 3 or 4 parents parenting that child, and it just gives it more legal stability for the child. We do not have that in Virginia. I can get a 3-way custody order or a 4-way custody order, and you've seen us do that in the office. We might have a same-sex lesbian couple where the one lesbian had her child by a former spouse, and so we might have both the father of the child, the mother of the child, and then the biological mother's new wife, all having joint custody. But we don't have a way yet in Virginia, by statute at least, to do a 3-parent or 4-parent adoption.
What about unmarried parents? Can they adopt in Virginia?
Not yet. I'm working right now. Delegate Alfonso Lopez just put in a bill which previously I've tried, that Equality Virginia has put in and other sponsors have put in prior years, to allow what we call second parent adoptions. So in Virginia, we can do a step-parent adoption where the adoptive parents are married, or we can do an adoption by a married couple, which includes, ever since marriage equality includes same-sex married couples, or we can do an adoption by a single parent. But right now, under our current statute, we can't do an adoption by 2 or more unmarried folks. However, with the second parent adoption bill, if we could get that passed, we would have that flexibility. And a lot of other states have that flexibility. And I actually had a case where we had a gentleman who was at one of the military schools, military academies. And I found out that evidently you're not allowed to sire a child if you are in a military academy and stay in the academy. Well, he had somehow accidentally sired a child with his girlfriend. And so we looked at what the options were. And the girlfriend, he was from Virginia, but the girlfriend was from Colorado. We actually were able to do an adoption in Colorado. I referred it to a Colorado colleague, and they were able to do an adoption between the girlfriend and her father, which got my guy in the military academy off the hook of being a legal father. So he was able to stay in the academy. And then after he graduated, he was able to adopt his own child back, which is interesting. But in addition to just unmarried couples that may not want to marry for whatever reason, the marriage tax penalty, in addition to those situations, there really is a need for having the ability to have unmarried folks be able to adopt a child, because we see it a lot with maybe grandmother is co-parenting with daughter,
right,
or grandmother is co-parenting with son. Or we have 2 foster parents that are unmarried that have helped co-foster parent a child, and they're both equally just as involved in the child's life. It could be 2 single women that have helped co-parent. So there are situations where having a second parent adoption bill, or having the ability to have people that are not necessarily married but are also parenting, would give legal security to the child. So we are about to go to break, and today we are talking about understanding the myths of adopting a child. If you have any questions about adoption law, now is your chance and time to call 804-454-1366. This is Raising the Bar, Greater RVA's Law Talk radio show, and we will be right back after the break.
You've been listening to Raising the Bar, Greater Richmond's premier law talk radio show. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
With SRN News, I'm Rich Thomason in Washington. First the wildfires, then the rains, unleashing devastating mudslides in Southern California. At least 15 deaths reported. Search and rescue crews still at work across the region. The Trump administration has suffered a setback in its bid to phase out the DACA program. Federal judge says it must stay in place at least until lawsuits over the program have been decided. South Korea's president looking to build on the Olympics agreement with North Korea, saying that he'd be open to a meeting with Kim Jong-un under certain conditions. AT&T will not be selling Chinese Huawei smartphones in the U.S. after all. No reason for the decision, although a congressional report 5 years ago cited Huawei as a security risk. On Wall Street at the opening bell, the Dow down about 70 points. More details at srnnews.com.
19 men attacked our country. You'd be the first to fight back.
On January 19th comes the declassified true story.
We're on our own, fighting 50,000 Al-Qaeda fighters.
Of 12 fathers, brothers, soldiers.
If we fail, what happened back home is going to happen again.
Who volunteered to fight.
How do you love your family and leave them to go to war?
And gave us a reason to hope. From the producer of Black Hawk Down.
I ain't losing one, man.
12 Strong, the declassified true story of the horse soldiers. January 19th, rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
If you're a small business, first impressions can make all the difference. With Grasshopper, you get all the features of a professional business phone system on your mobile phone. Choose a business phone number, make calls, and send texts. Stay connected and work from anywhere with features like Wi-Fi calling and our desktop app. Set up your account in minutes with no long-term contracts and 24/7 customer support. Make your small business big. Now get $20 off your first month when you visit grasshopper.com/radio. That's grasshopper.com/radio.
Before a trip, you program your destination into the GPS. You need the best directions to get where you want to be.
You will arrive at your retirement in 8
It's the same for retirement. You need a voice to guide you. In Richmond, that voice is Isaac Wright. Join him every Saturday at 3 and Sunday at noon on WNTW 820 The Answer. Isaac's experience can help your retirement journey feel like a drive down easy street. Take the first step by tuning in Saturdays at 3 and Sundays at noon for Retire Right with Isaac Wright.
Arriving at your retirement.
Why do I have a problem with millennials? I'm sick and tired of hearing the word, and I'm sick and tired of catering to them, and I'm sick and tired of hearing what they think, because they don't think. All they do is spew the data that they get off an iPhone or what's been put into their silly little heads in the public schools.
Tune in to the Savage Nation weekdays here on Richmond's Choice for Conservative Talk Radio, WNTW 820 AM and 97.7 FM, The Answer.
Now, back to Raising the Bar. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
We are back to today's show. This is Colleen Quinn of the law firm of Locke and Quinn, and today we are talking about understanding the myths of adopting a child. And remember, if you have any questions about adoption law, now is your time to call in and get free information at 804-454-1366. And so right before the break, we were talking about whether unmarried parents could adopt in Virginia, which is not yet the case, but is the case in other states. But there is a pending a second parent adoption bill that's been introduced just recently, where we're at least looking to see if we can move things forward in Virginia, where because a lot of other progressive states already have, and actually a number of conservative states too have second parent adoption bills.
Social services often, are in favor of having those kind of alternative, like you were talking about, grandparent or relative situations where you have more than one person parenting the child. Right.
And they don't want to be married because, grandma doesn't want to marry her daughter or son. It doesn't make sense.
Right. All right. So shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about a term you hear a lot, open adoption. What does it mean to have an open adoption?
Another mysterious term with a lot of myths surrounding it. So some people will hear the term open adoption and they think that that means that the placing parent or the birth parent is going to actually be co-parenting the child or somehow, heavily involved in the child's life. And what open adoption actually means is that, from a legal sense, is that the placing parent is going to know who the adoptive parents are and have the ability to have some sort of ongoing contact with them. Now, that could be minimal contact. That could be just a picture and letter update once a year. Or it could be more extensive contact, picture, letter updates much more frequently. And even you come to the baby's birthday party and you come to the baby's, the child's, now first communion, or, you come to their kindergarten recital. And so it can be much more involved depending on the arrangement. And in Virginia, like a number of states, we have something called a post-adoption continued contact agreement, which we use the acronym PACA, P-A-C-C-A. And the majority of states have the ability to have enforceable PACAs, or ongoing placement communication agreements. And so this has become much more prevalent throughout the United States, is to have some sort of an ongoing contact agreement. So that concept of open adoption really means that if I'm the placing parent, I get to select my family, I get to know who they are, I get to know a lot of information about them.
Mm-hmm.
I may even be able to see a copy of their home study if they're willing to share information to that level of detail. At a minimum, I'm going to get to know them, and I'm going to see their adoptive parent profile that they put together. And then I'm going to have some sort of ongoing contact with them as the child grows and develops, where they keep me informed through pictures and letter updates. It could be a Facebook page that they upload regularly. It could just be by texting. But one way or another, that placing parent's now going to be reassured that the child's doing well, and also they'll have their curiosity satisfied as to what the child looks like. Mm-hmm. So this is a very good thing, also because the child sometimes can get continued information about their birth parent. Mm-hmm. And so, sometimes these children of adoption, they romanticize that their placing parent is, some big CEO of a company, when in fact their placing parent is, a 7-Eleven clerk down the street. And so grounding the child in more reality and having accurate information about your biological parents, again, psychologically can be a very good thing. So this whole concept of open adoption actually has been a very positive thing, especially in terms of reassuring the placing parent, getting additional information to the child as to how the child's doing, having the adoptive parents, who oftentimes develop a very close relationship with mm-hmm. the placing parent, knowing that the placing parent is doing well, because usually that parent's placing the child because they're not in a good place in life at that time. Either they financially can't afford it, or they're just not able to take care of themselves. So for all different reasons, open adoption has been a good thing. But it doesn't mean that the placing parent's going to co-parent the child,
right? Right.
Which is often misunderstood.
So you spoke earlier about children in foster care being, some of the most available, but I also know, you said they're usually older and it can take a long time for them to be freed up for adoption. Why does it take so long for children in foster care to be freed up to adopt?
Well, when you think about our DSS system, typically the Department of Social Services, and you can call it the Department of Children and Family Services mm-hmm. in other states. It gets called different things, but basically it's our government welfare, child welfare system. The number one goal is to return the child home, mm-hmm. if at all possible. So what happens in a lot of these cases is that the child has been found to be abused or abandoned. Maybe the biological parents are on drugs, or they have an alcohol problem, or they have a mental health illness. And so what happens is the child may be removed from the home, placed in foster care, and then what our child welfare system does is it's designed to give a lot of services to the biological parent to try to get them to the point where we can put the child back in their home, because the number one goal is reunification, return home, and to basically allow that child to grow up with their biological family. That can take some time, and typically there's a minimum of 18 months allowed for the biological parent to get their act together. Mm-hmm. But what happens as a reality is sometimes the child will return home, then there'll be another incidence of abuse, neglect, abandonment, and then the child will be removed again. And so sometimes it will take a lot more time to see if you can rehabilitate the biological parent. And you and I, we had the case where the biological mother was using pot, mm-hmm. and she was a pretty much regular pot user. And the biological father was convicted on a felony for drug distribution, and so he's in prison. And the judge is bending over backwards to biological mom in terms of her pot usage. Mm-hmm. And so that child ended up, being in foster care for more than 4 years, at which point dad gets released from prison. Dad is completely rehabilitated, and now dad steps back into the picture and starts to be able to have time with his son, etc. And the issue is, okay, why is the child in foster care for so long?
Mhm.
Well, because that judge was giving that mom the benefit of the doubt. Ultimately, in that case, mom shows up, as you know, at court and says she's clean and everything, and she fails the drug test then and there. Dad, he passes the drug test, he stays clean, and ultimately in that case, child was returned home to dad. But some 5 years later, after the child had been in foster care.
Mhm.
And so we see those situations where it takes a long time for the child to be freed up. And then, of course, after looking at the goal of return home, the DSS or whatever child welfare system it is, that also has to look at relatives next as the
Mhm.
next option. So sometimes it takes a long time to sniff out what relatives are out there and what relatives are going to be suitable to take the child
Mhm.
in. And then, sometimes you'll have a relative you didn't even know about come out of the woodwork. So then DSS has to look and see, okay, what relatives might be suitable. After that, what foster parents that have been caring for the child might be suitable. But we see a lot of cases where the child is in foster care for longer than we would have anticipated. And that's why it's taking so long to get some of these children freed up to be adopted. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to make sure, as a number one goal, that the child can return to their
Mhm.
home. By the way, Katie, I've been using the term birth parent, and Adam Pertman, who wrote Adoption Nation, and all of the social workers that work in this field do not find that to be a very flattering term. Okay, it's kind of like it's. However, that term birth parent or birth mother, birth father is used in most of the statutes.
Mhm.
So we lawyers tend to use that term, and it's not intended to insult anybody. I asked Adam, well, what term am I supposed to use? And he says, well, it's an expectant parent with a parenting plan. And I said, well, we lawyers do get paid by the word or the hour. And sometimes it's not always an expectant parent, it's one that's already delivered. So how do we, address that? But anyway, I don't want anybody to be insulted by the use of that term. It's a term that's steeped in our statutes, and that's where it comes from.
Okay. So switching to these, we talked about the difference between agency placements and direct or parental placement adoptions. What sort of services is an agency providing in an agency adoption versus what they might be doing in a parental placement adoption?
Right. So in an agency adoption, I call that the all-inclusive
Mhm.
resort, because it's pretty much including all of the services that are needed. The locating of the placing situation, the background information on the child, background information on the birth parents, counseling of the birth parents, matching with the adoptive family, making sure that it's if there's any ongoing contact agreement, that's going to be worked out, taking the actual entrustment or relinquishment. The only thing that might not be included in that all-inclusive resort is what I call the airline ticket, which is the finalization of the adoption. Sometimes that's included in the agency package, and sometimes the adoptive parents have to pay that separately. In the private or parental placements, I call that the a la carte. Okay, as opposed to your fixed pre when you go, to a restaurant and you have your fixed meal. This is the a la carte route. And believe it or not, in the adoption world, the a la carte route tends to be less expensive than the fixed pre or the all-inclusive route. So the agency services in the parental or private placement world tend to be more on an ad hoc or a la carte basis. The agency will perform the home study. The agency might provide birth parent counseling. The agency will do whatever reports to court are necessary. So in Virginia, the agency will do the initial report to court and include all the information about the placing parents, the information about the child, the information about what fees have been paid, that nobody's bought the birth mom a new red Corvette, and basically make sure that the court knows everything's been on the up and up. There's been no underhandedness or anything going on, what the ongoing contact arrangement is going to be. So the agency does all of these on an a la carte basis. And it gets confusing because in the private or parental placement or direct placement world, you still use an agency
Mhm.
for the a la carte services, but that is not an agency placement.
So in these parental placements, and I know you've talked a little bit about it already, but this is one of the most common questions I think we get. If you are trying to do a direct parental placement adoption, how do placing parents and adoptive families find each other? How do they match up?
Right. And so it's the same way as if I needed my roof fixed and I knew you just had your roof fixed. I'd be like, Katie, who did you use to have your roof fixed?
Yeah.
And you're going to tell me. It's pretty much just that good old fashioned networking has been the number one way. So there are profile sites online where adoptive parents can place their profile ad, their adoptive parent ad essentially, and the birth mother can find them directly that way. However, and I actually have some clients that have advertised on Craigslist, believe it or not. But for the most part, what a lot of adoptive parents will do is they will work on getting the word out. And now there are certain folks you can identify, like OBGYNs. You might be able to give your adoptive parent professional card, your business card, to your OBGYN, because they might know of a situation of an unplanned pregnancy. And there are certain groups that, like Planned Parenthood, that may or may not keep adoptive parent profiles on hand. But other than that, it's a little bit scattershot. And folks will basically do their Christmas card mail out and let folks know that they're looking to adopt, or on their Facebook page, or they will create a new Facebook page devoted toward their adoption journey. They might just get the word out through what I call e-blasts. It might be, you belong to a book club, so your book club group. I have several tennis teams, so I would make sure everyone on my tennis team knew. If you had golf buddies. And then oftentimes we will tell folks to recruit, grandma wannabes or grandpa wannabes, or, relatives to basically help out with get that word out effort. But it's amazing how through former neighbors, former work colleagues, church is a big one, through the Bible study group, etc. People are saying, hey, I know about an unplanned pregnancy situation, and I know these other people that are seeking to adopt, and then those matches are happening.
So you mentioned earlier, we've had people just post on Craigslist, and you also said, that the homestead agency is going to have to be telling the court, there's no red Corvette being exchanged here. Right. So what are the rules in these types of situations when you're, reaching out, and also especially when it comes to money?
Yes, because there are folks out there that are children brokers. Okay, and in Virginia, you can't pay basically a children broker to get you a child. You can pay a licensed child placement agency in Virginia to get you a match. But anyone else that matches you, even an attorney, you can't pay a match fee. So there are folks in the U.S. that are called facilitators, and even California, they're licensed facilitators, but you can't pay a facilitator or even a licensed facilitator under Virginia law. So most of these matches are happening through unpaid intermediaries, where there's no match fee that's being paid as part of the arrangement. So Virginia does carefully police what gets paid and what doesn't get paid. Adoptive parents can place an ad, and I mentioned Craigslist. Oftentimes the publication will ask them to have their lawyer, me or you, basically do a letter saying that they are legitimate and they are either home study approved or they're in the process of doing their home study. And so often we will do letters oftentimes for publications. And I tell clients too, hey, I went to William & Mary undergrad and they still have the flat hat. And if I was looking to adopt, I would run an ad in the flat hat for a small fee, and the flat hat might want to get a letter from the lawyer. But, that co-ed at William & Mary who has the unplanned pregnancy might see that ad while they're looking through, the ads and seeing, okay, who's got, a bunk bed available or whatever, a loft, etc. Or, we went to UVA for law school and they still have like the Cavalier DLE. And I also tell people, for a small token, most churches, will put your ad in the church bulletin, right?
Yeah.
So pretty much there's nothing illegal about posting an ad or on these online profile sites. That's all permissible.
And what about any money that adopting families give to placing parents? Are there rules on that in Virginia?
Yes, absolutely. So we have some pretty good restrictions on what can be paid in terms of living expenses. And most states do. Most states have restrictions on living expenses. Now, some states don't, and I'll tell you about this lawyer out in LA in a minute, but in Virginia, you can only pay living expenses to a placing parent if they have a doctor's note taking them out of work or saying that they can't work due to the pregnancy or the post-pregnancy delivery. So most living expenses in Virginia are capped at around 3 months, usually the last month of pregnancy and then the 2 months post-delivery. So, and those living expenses can also include assistance with that placing parents' dependents. So, food, shelter, clothing, etc. But until we have that doctor's note, there can be no payments made. Many other states are very similar, except California and Utah and a few other states tend to be a little bit looser in terms of living expenses. So we do have the fellow out in LA who is out there advertising that birth moms can fly to LA and live there and be taken on daily shopping and beach trips, and basically then charging $70,000 to $100,000 for an adoption. So that's why it's the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
So but it's not necessary to pay that much money to be able to effectuate an adoption.
Right. And not legal in Virginia.
Right. And not legal in Virginia. Would not be a legal payment in Virginia. Exactly.
So if this is, of course, another really big question we get a lot. If a placing parent says she wants to place a child for adoption, can she change her mind, and how long does she have?
And it varies from state to state, as you know. But in Virginia, if she's doing a parental placement, she still has to come to court and give her consent. And we're not talking about step-parent adoptions or relative adoptions where she can do an out-of-court consent. We're talking about just, folks that are not relatives, not step-parents. She has to come to court and give her consent. The baby has to be at least 3 days old, and then she has 7 days to revoke or change her mind or undo the consent. Now, it gets a little crazy, and we have to kind of map it out sometimes, but if she comes to court and the baby is already 10 days old, then she can waive her 7 days revocation. I call it the 7-day agony period because it's most birth moms I've worked with, they say it's another 7 days that they don't want hanging over their head. And it's, of course, another agony period for the adoptive parents. It's another 7 days hanging over their head, too. Right. There might be some situations where we want her to keep the 7 days because maybe we haven't terminated birth dad's rights or something. So there are some such situations, but for the most part, most birth moms will waive the 7 days once they get to that 7-day mark. And then, of course, consent revocation periods in other states, they just vary dramatically. In some, it can be up to 30 days. And in other states like Kansas, they can sign an irrevocable out-of-court consent 48 hours after birth. And so you sign 48 hours or more after birth, and it's a done deal at that point. You don't get any chance to revoke. So that's in a parental placement. In an agency placement in Virginia, the birth mom will sign an entrustment agreement, and typically will have, again, up to 7 days, or until the baby is 10 days old, or until the child is placed in the adoptive parent's home. So in the agency placements, the birth mom oftentimes will sign her entrustment before a social worker for that agency at the hospital, usually right before she's released from the hospital, about 2 days after birth, maybe 3 days if she has a C-section. And then she gets the greater of either the 7 days or the up to 10 days after birth, or until the child's placed in an adoptive parent's home.
Okay. And what about birth fathers? What sort of rights do they have?
So it depends on whether they are a putative birth father, which is a funky term, not punitive, but putative birth father. And that would be one that is not married to the birth mom, that has not been established by DNA testing to be a dad, that's not on the birth certificate. So this is an unmarried unlegally determined dad. And in that case, a putative dad, if we know who he is and where he is, we send him notice of his right to register with the Virginia Putative Father Registry.
Mm-hmm.
And he has 10 days from the mailing of the notice to register if he wants to continue to get notice of the adoption proceedings. If he is not a putative dad, but he is what we call an adjudicated, which means that there's a court order that
Mm-hmm.
says he's dad, or he's an acknowledged, which means that the birth mom has either included him on a tax return or put him on the birth certificate, or he is a presumed dad, which would be one that was like legally married to the birth mom. If he's one of those dads, then we have to give him actual notice of the adoption proceedings. And then a birth dad in Virginia can sign a consent anytime prior to the birth, before a notary,
Mm-hmm.
or after the birth. They can come to court and give their consent along with the placing mom. They can also just sign a denial of paternity. I just flat out deny him the dad, and they can sign that either before the birth or after the birth, and then that'll address their rights. And Virginia's scheme is not that different from other states, but
Mm-hmm.
every state is very specific in terms of how the birth father's rights can be addressed. So that putative dad, if he does register, now he falls into the same category as the acknowledged or adjudicated or presumed dad. Now he's entitled to actual notice of the adoption proceedings.
Okay. What about other family members? Do they have rights, or can they have ongoing contact, or how are they involved in these cases?
Grandparents and other parents have standing to intervene in an adoption proceeding, but ultimately it's up to the biological parent's decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've had cases where the grandparents have tried to intervene in the adoption proceedings, and basically the court says no, that the biological parents have a fundamental right to decide whether to parent or not parent. And those have been difficult cases. We even had the case where both sets of grandparents showed up at the court hearing, and the mom and dad, young folks, just did not want to keep the child within family. They didn't, want their parents to adopt. And so we had to basically continue the case and come back on a date where the grandparents didn't know about the proceedings, so that the birth parents could go ahead and give their consent. That's what they wanted, and
Mm-hmm.
they were entitled to do that.
What happens if they're minors? You mentioned that they were young in that case. Do they have to have parental consent then, or are there special accommodations made?
Great question, because in Virginia and in most states, actually minors are treated as adults for the purpose of consenting. Now that said, if they are under 18, I can't imagine a single judge in Virginia that wouldn't appoint a guardian ad litem for them as part of their consenting process.
Mm-hmm.
But adoption's one area. And what's interesting is they still have to get parental consent if they want to abort. Okay. But if you want to do the adoption, you can go ahead and consent to your adoption without having a parent involved. So it's kind of interesting how there's a difference in those two areas.
Yeah,
definitely. So we are about to close out the show today, and we've been talking about understanding the myths of adopting a child. And if you have questions about adoption, please go visit the Adoption and Surrogacy Law Center's website, which is just www.adoptionsurrogacylawcenter.com. Or if you Google Adoption and Surrogacy Law Center, it will come up. Another great resource is the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys website. And when I say I'm on the board, we're in the middle of redoing that website, and that's going to contain a lot of really good information, especially as we add content to that site. So thank you so much for joining us today. And please tune in next week for Raising the Bar Law Talk Radio Show next Wednesday at 9 a.m.
News this hour from townhall.com. I'm Rich Thomason. 15 people dead, more than 20 others injured. Search and rescue operations ongoing. That's the situation in parts of Southern California.